Part 1. I have lived more in my head than I have lived in the world. For longer than I can remember, I believed life was something that would begin tomorrow. Today was only preparation. Today was only waiting. Today was only another rehearsal for the person I was certain I would become. Tomorrow never argued with me. It never demanded proof. It never asked what I had done with yesterday. It simply stood far away, shining like a promise, while I remained exactly where I was. I have built 1,000 lives without leaving my room. I have been rich without earning a single coin. I have stood on stages that never existed, while crowds that were never born applauded, a version of me that reality had never met. I have won every argument inside my mind. Outside, I barely spoke. I have been brave in imagination and afraid in life. There is a strange comfort in dreams. They never reject me. They never laugh when I fail. They never remind me how ordinary I have become. Reality always asks for effort. Imagination only asks me to close my eyes. So I kept choosing imagination. I told myself I was different, not lazy, not lost, just misunderstood. I believed I was waiting for the perfect opportunity, the perfect day, the perfect version of myself. I never realized that perfection is one of the most patient lies ever told. It waits forever because it never intends to arrive. I remember the first time I fell in love, or perhaps I remember the version I invented. She smiled once, and my mind turned that moment into an entire lifetime. We had conversations that never happened. We traveled to places we never visited. We solved problems we never faced. I imagined growing old beside someone who had never even imagined growing old beside me. In my head, she understood every silence. In reality, she barely knew my name. She was living her life. I was living the story of her. When she walked away, she did not destroy my world. She simply continued hers. It was I who refused to leave the imaginary one behind. For months, then years, I kept returning to memories that had become more fictional than real. I rewrote every conversation, every possibility, every ending. I convinced myself that one day she would realize she had loved me all along, that one day she would return, not because she had changed, but because I could not accept that some stories end without asking for permission. Time moved. She moved. Everyone moved. Only my imagination stayed exactly where it had always been. People think heartbreak is loud. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes heartbreak is simply refusing to stop imagining a future that has already died. I thought I was healing. In truth, I was only becoming better at pretending. The strange thing about living inside the mind is that nothing ever truly ends there. Failures become unfinished stories. Love becomes an endless possibility. Success remains permanently one decision away. Everything feels alive because nothing is ever tested against reality. Reality closes doors. Imagination removes the walls. So I stayed, safe, untouched, unchanged. Years passed quietly, not dramatically. Time rarely announces itself. It steals through ordinary mornings. One birthday becomes another. One Monday becomes another. One promise becomes another excuse. I kept telling myself that I had potential. Potential became my favorite word. Potential requires nothing. Achievement does. People admired my ideas. No one could admire my results, because results never came. I imagined becoming wealthy so many times that my mind almost mistook imagination for memory. I could see the house, the expensive car, the interviews, the respect, the faces of people who once ignored me suddenly asking how I had done it. I replayed those scenes every night, each version more detailed than the last. I knew exactly what success would feel like. I just didn't know what discipline felt like. Dreams never made me tired. Work did. Planning felt productive. Doing felt frightening. Inside my imagination, I was unstoppable. Outside, I postponed one more day, then one more, then another year. Eventually, I noticed something strange. The people around me had stopped talking about what they wanted to become. They had become something. My cousins found jobs. My friends built families. My classmates complained about bosses, bills, responsibilities. I laughed at them sometimes. I told myself they had settled. I was destined for something greater. But greatness that only exists inside the imagination has no weight. It cannot feed a family. It cannot pay rent. It cannot convince the mirror. At home, everyone woke with purpose. My father left early. My mother carried responsibilities she never complained about. My brothers and sisters hurried through mornings because someone depended on them. Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone except me. I became an expert at looking busy. Thinking looked like working. Research looked like progress. Planning looked like preparation. But when the sun disappeared each evening, nothing in my life had actually moved. Only the stories inside my head had grown longer. I kept believing that one day everyone would understand. One day they would see that I had always been different. One day they would apologize for doubting me. The strange thing is, no one was thinking about me as much as I imagined. People were simply trying to survive their own lives. While I spent years imagining being watched, everyone else was too busy carrying their own burdens to notice. That realization hurt more than rejection. I was not the hero of other people's stories. I was only the hero of my own imagination. The hardest prison has no walls. It is built from beautiful futures that never become present days. I lived there for years. I decorated every room with hope. I called it ambition. I called it destiny. I called it waiting for the right moment. But beneath every beautiful name was a simpler truth. I was afraid. Afraid that reality would judge the person imagination had already crowned. So I stayed where failure could never reach me, inside my own mind. And without realizing it, I watched my life begin to pass me by. There is something cruel about time. It never raises its voice. It never knocks on the door to announce that it is leaving. It simply walks past me while I am busy imagining the life I will start tomorrow. I did not notice my youth disappearing. I noticed it in photographs, in the mirror, and the way people younger than me started calling me older brother, and the way children I once saw being carried in someone's arms were suddenly applying for jobs. The world had continued without asking whether I was ready. Inside my head, I was still 17. Still waiting for the perfect beginning, still believing that greatness was only a few months away. But my body had stopped believing those stories. My face carried years my mind refused to count. Every birthday became uncomfortable, not because I feared getting older, because I feared having nothing to show for it. People asked simple questions. What are you doing these days? How's work? What are your plans? I smiled. I laughed. I changed the subject. No one knew that those ordinary questions felt heavier than accusations, because I had answers inside my imagination. Outside, I had silence. I became skilled at disappearing. I avoided weddings because success gathered there. I avoided family functions because comparison lived there. One avoided old friends because they carried proof that life had moved on. Each conversation reminded me of another year. I had spent rehearsing instead of performing, so I stayed home. And every evening I promised myself that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow became the safest place I had ever lived. Nothing bad ever happened there. Nothing good happened there either. It was a country made entirely of promises. I became its lifelong citizen. Sometimes I would lie awake until sunrise, not because I was working, because I was imagining myself working. I pictured interviews where everyone admired me. I imagined walking into an office wearing confidence instead of fear. I imagined checking my bank account and smiling for the first time. I imagined buying gifts for my parents. I imagined telling them they never had to worry again. Those moments felt so real that I almost cried. Then morning arrived. The room looked exactly the same. The ceiling had heard every promise before. The walls had watched me become older without becoming different. The dream ended where it always ended, with me opening my eyes. There is a dangerous kind of hope, not the hope that inspires action, the hope that replaces it. I kept believing that because I could clearly see my future. I was somehow moving toward it. I confused vision with progress, fantasy with preparation, desire with effort. I mistook emotional excitement for actual change. Nothing changes simply because it is imagined beautifully. Reality has never accepted payment in dreams. Still, I continued paying with them. Sometimes I wondered if everyone secretly lived this way, if everyone built invisible kingdoms before going to sleep, if everyone held conversations that would never happen, if everyone imagined becoming the version of themselves they introduced to strangers. Maybe they did. The difference was that they eventually stood up. I remained seated, watching life through the window of my own mind. I often believed I was special, not because I had achieved anything, because I believed I was meant to. It is surprisingly easy to feel extraordinary when reality is never allowed to test the claim. Inside my imagination, I was a genius waiting to be discovered. Reality kept asking a simple question. If that is true, then where is the work? I hated that question. Not because it was unfair, because it had no answer. There were notebooks full of ideas, folders full of plans, hundreds of beginnings, almost no endings. I loved the feeling of starting. Starting made me feel like the future had already arrived. Finishing required facing the possibility that I was not as talented as I believed. So I protected my ego by never reaching the finish line. As long as the race remained imaginary, I could never lose. But I could never win either. My parents never asked me to become famous. They never demanded that I become wealthy overnight. They only wanted to see me moving, trying, building, failing honestly instead of succeeding only in stories. I misunderstood their silence. I thought they had stopped believing in me. Perhaps they were simply waiting for me to believe in reality more than imagination. There were evenings when I heard my family discussing expenses in the next room. They spoke quietly, as though lowering their voices could make the numbers smaller. I lay in bed imagining the day I would solve all their problems. I imagined handing over money, watching relief appear on their faces, hearing them say they were proud. Then I remembered none of it had happened. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That hurt in a way failure never could, because failure belongs to those who tried. I was grieving achievements that had never existed. The hardest lies are the ones I tell myself with complete sincerity. I'll start next week. I just need the right opportunity. I'm different. I work better under pressure. I have time. I spoke about it as though it belonged to me, as though it had signed an agreement promising never to leave. But time was never mine. It only passed through my hands, and I kept opening my fingers. There comes a quiet moment in every life when imagination and reality stand face to face. One asks, who could I have been? The other asks, who did I become? For years, I was too afraid to let them meet, so I closed my eyes again and returned to the only place where I had never failed, my own mind.